Hi, as Doreen said, my name is Ulrika Vanhoenacker, and I work at the National Agency for Special Needs Education and Schools here in Stockholm as a consultant at Resource Center Vision. I work mainly with students aged from 7 to 9 years, as well as their parents and teachers. Today I would like to present to you a summary of my essay titled Making Mathematics Accessible, a study of how paraeducators work with adaptations. I completed this essay a year ago as part of my special education teacher degree program at Stockholm University. Now I'm at slide number 2. In Sweden, all students with blindness are included in primary school. Teachers who will have a Braille reading student in the classes attend a course at the Resource Center Vision. When a student with blindness is between 7 and 9 years old, the classroom will have both a class teacher and a paraeducator. The paraeducator often has some form of teacher training. Generally, both the class teacher and the paraeducator attend our courses at the center. As part of this course, the teachers learn Braille as well as how to use special learning tools such as the abacus and computers adapted to the needs of the student. They also learn teaching methodologies for mathematics, reading and writing. In addition, consultants such as myself travel to schools to provide support to teachers when school asks for it. Slide number 3. Why did I choose to do a study of adaptations in mathematics? Well, at our courses at the Resource Center, teachers often bring up that they are unsure of how to adapt mathematics education to younger students. Yet somehow they must manage to make these adaptations. I wanted to see how they do it. To summarize, the aim of the study was to highlight how paraeducators adapt mathematics education to the needs of 7 to 9-year-old Braille reading students in primary school. First, I'd like to explain some small terminology I will use in this presentation. In a typical class, the class teacher first gives a lesson, kind of joint briefing, to the entire class, using a whiteboard for example. In this presentation I will use the word lesson for this. Slide number 4. I contacted 3 class teachers for my study. I learned that in all 3 schools it was the paraeducators who had responsibility for the adaptations in mathematics. Therefore, I decided to focus my observations and interviews on the paraeducators. During the observations, a video camera was used. The subsequent interviews were then based on sequences from the recorded material, a technique known as stimulated recall interviews. The 3 paraeducators had different educational backgrounds, but they had all attended our courses at the center. I observed 2 math lessons at each school and subsequently conducted an interview with each paraeducator. Slide number 5. Here is a presentation of the 3 schools and how the teaching was designed for the students. At school number 1, the paraeducator had started but not completed a secondary school teacher training program. The regular class teacher was on sick leave for some time, and so during my first observation, a long-term substitute teacher in mathematics was teaching. The substitute math teacher had not attended our courses at the center. During my second observation, there was a different substitute teacher who had actually attended a teacher training course at our center. The student used a math book in embossed Braille a computer with a braille display and a braille keyboard. However, the braille display was not functioning during my first observation. At the second observation, the student had brought a braille display from home. Slide number 6. At school number 2, the paraeducator was a preschool teacher. The class teacher had attended our training courses at Resource Center Vision. The student had the math book in embossed braille and had not yet started to use the computer for mathematics. Slide number 7. At school number 3, the paraeducator was a primary school teacher. The class teacher had attended our courses at the Resource Center. The student had a digital version of the math book and a braille display was connected to the computer. Slide number 8. Now I will talk about some of the main issues that came up in my study, illustrated with examples from these 3 schools. Forward planning. All paraeducators highlighted the importance of forward planning. At school number 3, the class teacher and the paraeducator had chosen to plan the teaching in advance, 1 hour before school started each morning. They both thought this system worked well, and they agreed that the time taken to plan their teaching in advance was absolutely indispensable. In contrast, paraeducators in the other 2 schools had difficult finding times to plan the teaching, and these paraeducators believed that the teaching was negatively affected by this. In school number 1, the paraeducator described a situation that was not optimal because the class teacher was on sick leave, and that substitute teacher in math did not have any experience working with students with blindness. Furthermore, the paraeducator and the math teacher did not have any time to plan lessons in advance together. This lack of planning was obvious during my observations. At my first observation, the student's braille display did not function. Therefore, the paraeducator was required to emboss the math tasks that the teacher would present on the whiteboard. Paraeducator number 1 said that she had to prepare this in a hurry and hand it to the student because, and I quote, "The math teacher and I hadn't planned this in advance, as the regular class teacher and I used to do, because she knows that we must work like that to keep up." Slide number 9. Simultaneous activities. During the lessons in the class, situations with simultaneous activities occurred. By simultaneous activities, I'm referring to times when the paraeducator engaged in one-on-one conversation or activities with a braille reading student even while the class teacher was addressing the entire class. For example, when the paraeducator for various reasons showed tactile materials or whispered to the student. At school number 2, the reason for such simultaneous activities was that the student always wanted to know what the classmates were doing or talking about. For example, during my first observation, the paraeducator had adapted images of objects that were to be measured later on. During the class teacher's lesson, the paraeducator chose to show the student these tactile images, despite the fact that the teacher was not talking about those. The student lost focus and responded vaguely whenever there was a question from the teacher. During the interview, paraeducator number 2 reflected that she had probably not chosen the best moment to show the tactile images. I quote, "Maybe the student had heard of this booklet and maybe even these tasks with measuring pens and I hadn't had time to prepare it in advance for the student to get it when the others got theirs. The paraeducator added a possible explanation. I quote, "The student always wants to do the same as the others." Slide number 10. At school number 3, according to the paraeducator, lack of time was the reason for simultaneous activities. This was the case even when materials had been prepared in advance. The paraeducator considered that if she waited to show the materials until after the class teacher's lessons, there wasn't enough time for it. The result was that she and the student fell behind the class teacher's lesson. I quote paraeducator number 3. "You noticed it. It is impossible to follow the class teacher's pace, but it's already a habit. First we listen to the class teacher, and then we usually work individually. The student must touch and feel, hold a lot of stuff in the hands. The whole situation becomes impossible, even though everything has been adapted in advance." Slide number 11. There is yet another situation that can lead to simultaneous activities. That's when teachers fail to verbalize what they are demonstrating. During one observation at school number 3, the class teacher used magnetically attached figures to show thousands, hundreds, tens, and units on the whiteboard. The student with blindness was excluded, and the paraeducator had to whisper or demonstrate with tactile materials what the teacher was showing on the whiteboard. The paraeducator and the student did not have a chance to keep up with her lesson. Here is an example quote from the class teacher number 3. "Here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 thousands. 10 times 1,000 is 10 thousands. Here they have actually put together 10 of these. There are these, and then there are those. 10 of those. 10 times 100 is 1,000. 10 of these, it is 100. And then you have a little blip here. The class teacher is referring to a unit, and that is 1. Great, now I think you really know this. I just wanted to show you how logically it has been constructed and how important it is to know how number bonds to 10. Paraeducator 3 explained to me in the interview that the reason for the simultaneous work was lack of time. But an analysis of the video materials reveals an additional reason, namely the failure of the class teacher to verbalize her teaching. It is worth noting that if a class teacher verbalizes his or her instruction during the lesson, it's easier not only for the student but also for the paraeducator. Class teacher number 2 did verbalize her teaching, for example when she referred to a ruler by name during lessons. She did not use expressions like this or that. As a result, paraeducator number 2 didn't have to tell the student what the class teacher was demonstrating on the whiteboard. Student number 2 was therefore fully included and could participate equally. Slide number 12. Prioritization. All 3 paraeducators mentioned lack of time for their students. How would the students with blindness be able to keep up with the sighted classmates in the math education? One way to make time for the students was to choose in advance what exercises the student needed to do. Paraeducator number 3, the only one who met with the class teacher 1 hour beforehand to prepare, made an assessment in advance of which particular exercises the student would undertake in the math book. When the paraeducator is a trained teacher, she can make an assessment and determine whether the student can go ahead or not. If the paraeducator does not have either teacher training or experience, then such assessments are difficult to make. The paraeducators 1 and 2 were very attached to the study material. They did not make assessments in advance of which task the student would undertake. The students had a specific number of pages to work through every week, the same quantity as the sighted classmates. Paraeducator number 1 said she omitted some tasks if the student understood the mathematics principle. But in fact, this was nothing that I witnessed during my observations. Instead, student number 1 would complete all the tasks as the sighted classmates. Slide number 13. Best practices. In order to ensure that lessons are optimally designed for the students, I think that adaptations of the lesson must first of all be well prepared in advance, and secondly, the adaptations should be presented to the student at the correct time in the teaching situation. Such adaptations lead to participation and independence for the student. As a consequence, students with blindness can improve their learning and educational development. Slide number 14. In summary, schools should consider the following factors regarding mathematics teaching and teaching in general. The paraeducator should be your trained teacher. The class teacher and the paraeducator should work together to plan the lessons. The class teacher should always verbalize the teaching. The paraeducator should not present tactile materials to the student during the class teacher's lesson. The class teacher or the paraeducator should prioritize in advance which particular task the student will undertake. Slide number 15. Thank you for listening.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, who has questions? I think a lot of us must have been amazed maybe by what similar problems we all face.
Yeah.
But what a difference in support there is for children. Like having a para-educator all the time in class, that is a luxury.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yes. So, are there no questions? Okay. Then I would like to call forward all the speakers again. Ole and Olive and Eric and Tessa and I have to Benjamin and 2 names it was. Helga, Björn. Oh, Borg. Okay, so thank you very much for your inspiring talks. I'm giving you a small present on behalf of the organization. It says Vika. I learned this was the unsurpassed coffee break you have here in Sweden. I definitely will come back. You want a pink one? You can change colors. There you are. And Tessa, there you are. Okay, and as I promised, there would be time for more questions. Anybody? I have questions. I feel, and you may also respond, regarding all the similarities and the differences at the same time. Wouldn't it be interested to do an international research like Ulrika has been doing? Ulrika has been doing, to compare the situations in the different countries, and maybe it could be possible to use the Iceland system in more countries. And in the end, the next tactile reading, I want to know what became of Edward, if he still walks, or that he has changed that. Okay. Then one last question to all of you. If you have a situation where there is no time to prepare the material, or there is no material that is exactly the same as for the rest of the class, which often is the case, because even if you adapt materials, very often there is much that cannot really be adapted. So it's left out, or the student is told to do something else. So if you recognize this, what would you prefer? I will ask all of you, and of course you can react. What would you prefer? Option number one, we all together, math is rather universal, design good materials for learning mathematics for blind and very partially students, accepting that in some cases it will be a little bit different than what the rest of the class is doing, and then maybe leaving it up to the teacher to put the children together in small groups, and then at least a small group is doing the same, or have the present situations where you often say, well, we do want them to have the same, but it's not impossible, so maybe you do homework now or you do something else. So I will give you the microphone. You still have one, you, Ulrika. What would be your answer?
To how to solve the problem with
Yes.
adapted material or not.
Yes, so the question is, should there be a specialized curriculum, specialized material for blind students, even though it's a little bit different than the rest from the class? Is that a good option? Let me stop it there.
I think the most important thing in mathematics education that is that, I mean, that they reach the same goal as the sighted classmates, but the way to come there could be different. I think it could be different for sighted children also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And also what you said about verbalizing.
Yeah.
I think it's really a missed chance that so many teachers don't verbalize, even when there is not a blind child in the class.
Yeah.
Because it is very important for many children. We think, oh, we point at the blackboard and they have understood, we show them a picture, but there are so many children who don't. Okay, so now I'm passing on the microphone. Eric?
Thank you, Doreen. A very difficult question. Myself, I'm not a math teacher. I'm a biology teacher, and in my I only teach children with a visual impairment. But in my view, and I think in mainstream it's much harder, never exclude a child. I rather sit them next to another child and work together and solve the problem than exclude a child and make him do his homework. But I don't think that a different curriculum, different for children is the answer. I think they are part of a bigger thing. They are part of a class and not alone.
I think we answered this in our lecture. We want similar exercises for blind children, follow the same curriculum. We just have to make the time. Yeah. Yes. It's not option.
Yeah, and just not this with let them just make the homework. It's just almost sounds like punishment. So just everything else other than that.
I think it's not about the material, because you can't show the mathematic. It is about how to grasp the idea, the concepts. So the best way, I think, is when the teacher thinking she has the whole class, and in that class there is one that cannot see. And then the teacher can prepare the lessons by thinking, how will I teach this theme, this concept, so they can grasp the concept. And my PhD show that the body, how they use their body, and how we make the children to speak with their own words, and making their own way of understanding this before they are presented. The symbols will be the best way.
I think both ways are good, because sometimes the child is doing the same as the other children, and sometimes he's doing something special. That's reality, I think. That's a reality in the Netherlands.
Yes, it's good to state that, because, as I said, we all have very different support opportunities. So, is there anybody who wants to react? Yes, I will.
Thanks. Did I get this right? Don't you have any international ways of writing mathematics, like rules or guidelines? Yes, you have. Okay. Yeah.
So you are not using a Braille code for mathematics?
But no international way of doing this.
No.
Different in
No,
no.
no,
That's
no. Even Braille for literacy is different per country.
isn't
Yes.
that very, very challenging?
Yes, I think you're right. If you would cooperate internationally, every country would have to do the translation for its own language and for its own Braille.
Because I do understand it when it comes to like ordinary text, but math is like international anyway.
Yes.
So why don't have? If you want to study chemistry and live in Sweden, you want to go to
Yes.
San Francisco and do that, and you can't because
Yes.
the structure of a molecule is designed in another way. That's
It's a very
oh my
good
God!
point.
Why?
You're there is, yes. You give the microphone to the gentleman in front of you. Please name your. Introduce yourself shortly by mentioning your name.
Hello, I'm Fredrik. Yes, work. I'm Fredrik Larsson in the Swedish Braille Authority. Well, most people tend to understand why literal Braille is different in each country. It's simply because we have very few dots, and some countries are not that interested in all letters that other countries are interested in. So that's the reason for why the literacy Braille is different in each country.
Exactly.
So, what do we do with the math then? Well, assume, for example, that you want digit 5 to look the same, both in the mathematical expression 5 plus 2 and in a text where you say that you have 5 fingers. I think that's a very reasonable assumption to do. And in Sweden, for example, we assume that if you read 50 square meter in an advertisement for apartment, the m to the power of 2 should be written in the same way as if you have an equation saying m to the power of 2 equals 9. So I would say that the difference in literal Braille to some extent takes the difference in math also to be a reasonable assumption.
Okay, anybody wants to answer that? I have a small addition to make. Can you tell me your name too, Mr.?
My name is Nathanael Dervinger, and I'm a journalist at Utbildningsradion, Educational Broadcast Public Service.
Okay. So, well, okay, thank you. So if you look at normal keyboards, I don't know if you ever have tried to type on a French keyboard. It's different. You make mistakes all the time, because even our alphabets are different, and most of the people sitting here use Latin letters, except Japan. It's very different system for Braille needed again. So that explains the differences for language. As you say, mathematics, of course, is very universal. It would be quite a challenge if we could develop something with less differences between the countries. Maybe it's possible, but it's a long way to go. I know there are a lot of projects have been working on this. Okay. No joke to share. Okay. Okay. So, well then, unless somebody has to add something, yeah, there is a gentleman from Switzerland, Vivian Aldrich.
Oh, thank you. Going, is this working? Going back to your question, whether should be doing exactly the same thing or whether it be better to have separate materials. I think in the presentations this morning we have seen that neither is ideal for everything. We saw in the first presentation that you need a separate way of introducing concepts for the blind people, and then we saw later in the presentation from Iceland how good it is if everything's very, very similar. And I think it's not about one or the other, it's about knowing when to do one, when to do the other, and when you need to compromise because it just doesn't work out, you don't have the time.
Yes. Now more people start reacting. Very good. Okay, then the nearest, and you will have a turn too. Oh, okay. Sorry, I have no authority. No authority, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm Nina Tvete from Norway. I'm not a teacher in mathematics, but I am blind and I'm concerned with the social aspect with learning. It's not just the learning aspect, it's also the social aspect. And I think it's so important that the blind children discuss with the sighted children the mathematics, and they can learn from each other. So I think it's so important that they, as far as long as possible, can use the same material.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's a very good point. Of course, you're not in school just only to get cognitive knowledge, but run, but also to be a socially able person. Yes, you're right. Yes?
Hi, I'm Frances Mary DeAndrea from the United States, and I went to a session in Australia at SPEVI, the South Pacific Educators Visually Impaired, and I can't remember the name of the presenter, but she had done a study of students who were included in Australia and looking at math success. And what she found was the students who did the best, who had the visual impairments, were in classrooms that were very project-based, and where the children were, all the children were doing math that was interactive. So for example, they were doing a thing on measurement, and they calculated the distance from their school to some major city, how many kilometers that was, and then at recess all the children ran around the field and they added how many laps that they did, and then they added that how many kilometers, and then so everything was very project-based, very body-based, and the children with visual impairments were included in that, and everybody got the same sort of information, and it was very concrete, and so I think it goes down to good teaching and good, not just rote learning, but the concepts that are involved, and making sure that children see the relationship between math in their daily life.
Okay, thank you for this. I'm sorry, last contribution, because now I managed to have short of time after all. But I am very happy that we also managed together to bring up some quite interesting questions. Maybe it's an idea even to organize a congress on this subject. And then of course I hope to see you all, and well, look around if you can, who's there, and find each other afterwards. And thank you very much, and thank you very much, speakers.